Welcome to Behind the Warrior, a podcast presented by the EOD Warrior Foundation. This series will focus on resources, interviews, and topics impacting EOD warriors, their families, and the military community at large.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Behind the Warrior podcast. I am your host, Maria Schabla, and today we are excited to be speaking with former EOD Tech and now social anthropologist working on a PhD at the University of Leuven in Belgium, Charles Warner III. Welcome to the podcast, Charles.
For having me, and hello from rainy Belgium.
Nice. So I usually start the podcast from the beginning, but today I'm going to try something a little bit different. And my first question for Charles is, what is social anthropology and why is it relevant today?
So it's a very broad and can be quite complicated term. And as I joked before, you ask three anthropologists and you might get three seemingly different answers about it. But essentially, social anthropology is the study of humans, human relations, our societies, and just how we are as social beings. So it's a very fundamental approach to the human existence, and it has a very long and very diverse and contested history in the world, but part of its relevance, and I could speak just an hour just on the relevance of anthropology, but part of its relevance is it is such a fundamental approach to understanding the human condition and answering in new ways some old problems, creating new ways of looking into the future based on how we understand our relations in the present.
I love it. I love it. Well, that is absolutely relevant because we've got a lot of problems to solve today. So Charlie, now let's kind of go back to you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where did you grow up?
Yeah, I'm a military brat, to use that, to throw that out there right away. So I still claim the area of around Ramstein Air Force Base as home. That's where I grew up as a teenager and graduated from Ramstein, and still visit frequently and have a lot of really great friends and even some new colleagues on the EOD side that are still active duty that are at Ramstein. So that's where I still call home.
That's awesome. And we actually have that in common because I spent a lot of time at Ramstein as a teenager. So, yeah, it's a beautiful area. I love Ramstein. So, Charlie, you joined the military. Can you tell us what kind of steered you in that direction and how did you get into EOD?
So leaving high school, wasn't really feeling ready for university. Didn't really have that imagined in my mind how that would look or what I would study or anything else like that. So, not exactly atypical for a teenager at that time. I had a really wonderful social circle around me in Germany after leaving high school, but I was having some difficulties just trying to imagine what the next couple of years would look like. And being a military brat, and as many of listeners will be able to connect with quite readily, having that legacy behind you, that military service, and always is kind of on the radar. It's always something that you're aware of, you're familiar with, and you see it as a very legitimate and sometimes appealing opportunity to move forward after high school or whatever stage of life. And I'm fourth generation military, so it's been a deep part of the family for many, many years, from my mom serving in the Army, my dad serving in the Army, great-grandfather was in World War I. So there's multiple layers that kind of are active when looking at some of these reasons behind going into the military in the beginning.
Wow. And so did you go into the Army, or what branch did you serve in?
Force. Yeah, I was Air Force and went pipeline direct to the schoolhouse in Florida. And for EOD, but one of the reasons why I turned around and volunteered again for EOD was the we could say a little bit of coercion from the military recruiters. They kind of dangled it in front of me, and through pop culture, I was familiar with the term bomb squad, but explosive ordnance disposal was new words on my tongue. And they set down the big book of jobs in front of me, which is the way it was done at that time, and said, yeah, you qualify for these ones, and you should take a look at this one in particular. You might find it interesting. I did know that the military recruiters also get a little bonus by directing candidates and applicants into EOD. I'm not sure if that's still a thing or not, but hopefully it was money well spent for him.
Interesting. So you went right into EOD. I have to ask though, so all of your family was Army, and how did they feel about you going Air Force?
Well, so Mom started out in the Army, but after her initial enlistment, she joined the Air Force as a civilian and then retired out of the Air Force as a civilian. So it was on her orders that we actually went to Ramstein, where I grew up at. So that was the kind of the positioning. And then also I had my one of my uncles was in the Navy. He was he didn't do a great job of selling me on the Navy, and I think that was intentional. And Mom and Dad weren't exactly trying to push me in any one direction, but we were familiar with the Air Force, and the test scores were high enough to allow for that, to explore that opportunity. And I'm very happy I went with that decision.
Very nice, very nice. And we had talked earlier that you actually were in school when the 9/11 terrorist attacks happened on the Twin Towers, and you had talked about there was a shift kind of in everything through your school. And I wondered if you could talk to us about that and then your career in EOD.
Well, to clarify, that was NAB school, the schoolhouse, not prior time, just for clarity.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you for that.
Conversational clarity. Yeah. So it was towards the end of my training at the schoolhouse in Florida when 9/11 happened. And many of us kind of in retrospect have spoke about a bit of a shift, because at that time when I enlisted, when I volunteered, it was kind of the post-Gulf War, post-Kosovo, Serbia intervention. There were more emphasis on these smaller scale geopolitical conflicts that the United States was involved in. So this whole idea of 20 years in Afghanistan, 20 years in Iraq, returning to Iraq, none of that had happened. And we learned quite quickly after our invasions into Afghanistan and the return to Iraq that the nature of what EOD had done in the past was changing. Our role in combat was changing, where it was not so much a kind of passive reactive force, but very much active. When there is no front line except for where you are, then you become a very active participant. And you can see that in the nature of how our mission changed with route clearances and kind of hunting for IEDs in Afghanistan and Iraq. So these it kind of, as the tactics and the techniques and the procedures and everything kind of adapted for the nature of combat in Afghanistan and Iraq, so did EOD. And that's why I saw us kind of, look at that shift of, where we were at the schoolhouse or, some of the older generation of EOD technicians, and fast forwarding to today and looking at how things have changed for EOD and just for the nature of warfare.
What division were you in when it happened? Do you remember?
Yeah, IEDs. I was in the IED division. So
oh my goodness.
I don't know if it's a completely accurate memory, but I remember that there was a Marine. One of our instructors was this crusty Marine guy. I can't recall his name right now, but he came hustling down to one of the training pits while we were in the IED section, and he starts talking about planes and something happening in New York and everything. And our initial kind of thought was like, okay, this is some kind of training scenario that's being constructed for us. But we were kind of still waiting for like, okay, where's the IED that, we need to respond to as trainees, and everything. But quite quickly that whole, misconception disappeared, and so it still remains kind of a poignant memory of that location and that period of time. But I kind of feel that was kind of our initial response, as this part of our training.
Wow, that's unbelievable. So how long did you serve in the military before you separated?
6 years within a 6-month extension, so it was kind of an odd 6.5 years. I took an extension to be able to go to Ramstein, return to Ramstein after a 1-year tour in South Korea, and quite happy that I did that. And it was from Ramstein that I deployed to Iraq in 2007, and that was just a few months shy of my separation date.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So now when you decided to separate, you kind of took a road less traveled and you joined the Peace Corps. Can you tell us about that decision and and your experience with the Peace Corps?
Yeah. So, it was definitely a road less traveled, and it still continues to be in a sense, from what I understand. But I left the military with the explicit goal of going directly into university, and I did that. I enrolled in the University of Utah for a bachelor's in cultural anthropology, and I had the wonderful luck of graduating with my bachelor's degree right about the time that one of the first really big government shutdowns happened. And then there was no resolution. So a lot of the budgets and money and research that I had kind of been looking at in Washington, D.C., so to transition from university into kind of a research position and continue my education, a lot of those opportunities disappeared or were suspended. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up in D.C. and was thinking back on the lessons learned during the bachelor's degree, and kind of how my understanding of American engagement overseas has been changing since my time in the military and as at the start of that academic career. And all of a sudden I was talking with a friend in DC, and she mentioned Peace Corps, and I'd heard of it before, but I'd never actually given it serious thought. But the timing seemed to fit just quite right. I had the degree, I had some life experience, things weren't really happening in DC the way that I had imagined. And so I signed up for Peace Corps, and they decided, Charlie, we accept you, and we're going to send you to Kosovo. And at that time, my understanding of Southeast Europe, former Yugoslavia, the Balkans, was limited. It was limited. I'd never traveled there before, even though with my family and I had traveled extensively in Europe. We hadn't spent any time in Southeast Europe, and so I had to do some fast research on Kosovo, and learn some very, very quick lessons. And we were the first group to go into Kosovo from Peace Corps. We opened up the country, as we say. You yourself are a returned Peace Corps volunteer from, if I remember correctly. So I'm sure you're familiar with that lingo. And so that was a really incredible experience. And there was something else I was going to mention about that, but I'm sure I'll be reminded to mention it later on. But it was really incredible, and that's what kind of kicked off my continuing love affair with that part of the world, with the people, the nature, with the complications, the problems, and everything. And so it's been almost a decade, and they're still welcoming me back, and allowing me back in some communities and everything. They haven't gotten tired of me yet.
Well, that's incredible. And I just, I have to ask, did you specifically choose Kosovo, or I know when I joined the Peace Corps, they give you, where in the world would you like to go? And when I, filled out my paperwork and was applying, I said, wherever the Peace Corps needs me, and I got sent to Kiribati, which is just kind of like at the end of the world. Beautiful, amazing culture. But did you specify Kosovo, or did they send you there randomly?
No. If I remember correctly, once you were at kind of the last stages of the application process, which at that time it took almost a year to go through the whole application process to join Peace Corps. It was only at the later stages of that, if I remember correctly, I was given a list of 3 countries, and I was asked to kind of like itemize them, of level of interest, where I would prefer to go, number 1, and where I'm okay to go, number 2, and yeah, sure, I'll go to number 3 as well if that's an option. And so I listed Kosovo at the top, if I remember correctly. And then, there was still a degree of uncertainty there until kind of the final stages. And we're like, okay, we're assembling a group of volunteers to go into and open up Kosovo. And I understand that the process has changed since then. Now it's a bit more streamlined and quick, and you have more kind of influence on where you might want to go as a Peace Corps volunteer, but I'm not really sure about it anymore.
What did you do in Kosovo?
I was with the education section, so I was placed in a public high school about 2 hours from the capital of Kosovo, about 2 hours from Pristina, and there started learning Albanian and working with the English language teachers at the public high school. So helping, just being a native speaker in the classroom, developing course content. One of the side projects I also took on was implementing after-school programs, which for a number of reasons hadn't really taken off at that particular high school, as well as many high schools across Kosovo. Financial reasons, time reasons, resource reasons, a number of reasons. So a side project was to get a Model United Nations Club started as an after-school project. And we were quite successful for that. And we even went abroad. We went to Macedonia. We traveled as a team to Macedonia and met up with other Peace Corps volunteers who had been kind of working on their own Model United Nations projects and helping the U.S. Embassy and funding from the U.S. government. So it was quite exciting. A bit nerve-wracking taking a group of, teenagers across an international border to another capital and just hoping nothing goes sideways that's going to come back and bite you in the ass as the chaperone, as the teacher, as the sponsor.
Wow. Yeah, you never know with teenagers.
Yeah. Well, it's in those situations where you start to reflect back on your own actions as a teenager in the past, and that just kind of ups the anxiety level perhaps a little bit as well.
That's funny. So now we're going to kind of get into the meat and potatoes of this interview. Is you received a 4-year grant from the University of Leuven with the goal of studying veterans nationally and transnationally and to bring veterans into academia. What does that mean?
So the funding, the 4-year funding, it actually comes from the Belgian division of the Belgian government, the Flemish regional government. So it's a public research institute, and I sent in an application at the very start of my intent to conduct doctoral research, and they said they saw some potential there and awarded the 4 years of funding to fully fund the PhD, the research, the travel, and everything that was built into the research project that I had designed. So that's the Research Foundation Flanders. The acronym's FWO. That's in the Dutch way of saying the name. But I was lucky enough to become a member of the faculty here at the University of Leuven, the Faculty of Social and Cultural Anthropology, and where I'm speaking to you from right now.
Awesome.
And so the research, as it's kind of evolved and started to look at some of these questions, it's veteran-oriented. It's research that is anthropological and ethnographic engagement with and alongside veterans in Southeast Europe or former Yugoslavia, Balkans, whatever kind of container or imagined container that you would like to use for the region. And indeed, the research looks at the kind of national relations between veterans within one country, but also I follow relations that are transnational. So the relations that connect over borders or across ethnicities or between religions, because there's a lot of different identities at play in Southeast Europe between ethnicity, religion, politics, nationality, class as well. And so the research in the early phases, the first 2 years, was really about learning the lives of the veterans in Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, Kosovo, a little bit in Slovenia, and just learning about their lives, how they saw society, how society sees them, and starting to bring those experiences into my own understandings of the word veteran and the veteran life world in the United States that I'm a part of, and also how Belgians use the word veteran, how Germans speak about the word veteran, and what that life after service looks like in these different countries for these different veterans. And that's really kind of the core aspects of that initial research, was gathering the data, as the social scientists like to say, that can be brought into the social sciences and inform some new practices or build new theories or adjust old solutions for new problems in a number of different ways. So it's really, it's veteran-centric, it's veteran-oriented, but it's also veterans that are not just on the margins of society, but also on the margins of geopolitics. And that's really one of the reasons why I chose to situate the research in that part of the world, because for many years they have been kind of on the margins of Europe. And so trying to bring those voices and experiences more into the center, expand the center, so the margins start to disappear and the veterans have more of a central role in the conversations and in the research.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it kind of makes me think, so you were talking about bringing veterans into academia. And so I guess I would think, is there a lot of research that has been done on veterans previous, or no?
Yes and no, I guess, to use that old cliche, but it depends a lot about what countries veterans are talking about. So in the United States, we have this emerging academic field called veteran studies. It's just starting to gather some publications and just starting to really be kind of a really fully formed umbrella for veteran academic engagement in the United States. But there are those of us that are also pushing to ensure that field of veteran studies is not just America-centric or British-centric, but also is, from its very foundations, from its very basis, meant to include veterans from all different walks of life, from all different countries, from all different types of wars, whether or not they might have been enemies of ours in the past, or if they were always allies, or if they have switched, both them or us have switched sides from allies to enemies, and everything. So it's and in doing that and looking at that in the United States, it starts to you start to find the other publications as well, both in the medical sciences, psychology, some of the different areas of philosophy and ethics. So the United States is really kind of, when you talk about veterans research, is quite robust in a number of ways, but it's also patchy. There's also some holes there. There's also some disconnections that really haven't been addressed. You move away from the United States and say in Croatia, or even to a greater extent in Bosnia, veteran-oriented, veteran-specific research is just getting started. You see traces of it in other research projects that have connected with veterans through the course of their own research, but it hasn't always been directly looking at engaging the veterans specifically. And so my research and the research of others is really kind of, in a way of saying, trying to amplify the veteran voice within the social sciences so that we're not being talked about, but we're being spoken with. We're collaborating on the veteran presence within the social sciences. And I think that's a really critical point to make, and something that researchers really have to understand, whether they're veterans themselves that have come to academia like myself, or if they're just academics who have never served in the military, no matter what war or what country. But having that collaboration, knowing that collaboration with the veterans and their life worlds and their life experiences is critical to speaking about veterans within the sciences, is really kind of a fundamental thing. And that word fundamental also takes us back to anthropology. And that's one of the powers of anthropology, is to really kind of get to the very roots of a social group, for example, like veterans. That's really one way we could look at it. It's a global veteran social group, and that's what anthropologists deal with, the social groups and globalization and these international, transnational connections. These are all things that anthropologists love to spend time on, and so it's work that brings veterans into the anthropological conversations.
I love it. It's so interesting. So you had used the term veteran life world and talked about a more holistic look at veterans and empowering them instead of the idea that vets need to be saved. And I found that very powerful. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so that's that argument, or that line of thinking started to emerge as I was doing my master's degree in social and cultural anthropology. And the master's thesis was all about Albanian veterans living in Kosovo. And as I was doing what's grandly called the literature review, you find all these different articles and pieces and research talking about veterans, but it was very not limited, but there was this impression as a veteran looking at the resources that I was finding, as well as an academic myself looking at these. It was as if the only veteran that the academia had ever seen was a wounded, damaged, trauma case veteran that was always in need of salvation. Mm-hmm. You'd be completely justified in thinking that was the impression that academia has of veterans, if you just looked at some of the dominant body of research that's connected to veterans. And as a veteran myself, and in the course of my research, I kind of started to want to problematize this. And I was like, yes, these are the injuries and the psychological aspects of the veteran life after service are quite critical and play deeply into the formation of the veteran identity personally held by any one individual. But there were also these larger communities at play, and there was these larger understandings that could be had of veterans, where you don't always need to find us only in the hospitals or in the clinics. Mm-hmm. You find us in these different parts of life, in these different areas of society. And some of us have learn to be able to kind of continue on with the momentum of our lives, despite having some either injuries or having to kind of reflect back on moral injury and the transition process from being active duty military to civilian to a veteran. All these different types of things were kind of touched on, but they were never really kind of holistically engaged and not having academia forming a more full picture, a more accurate and complete picture of the veteran in society. So it's not so much that I had a problem with the emphasis on the psychological needs and the emerging healthcare requirements or the lack thereof that some veterans find themselves in the situation of. It was to add on to that and have a broader kind of understanding of the veteran and how we connect with one another, how we support one another, and how those individuals and those collectives brought into academia and have more of a comprehensive understanding rather than just seeing only the negatives or emphasizing only one aspect of life after service.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Wow, I love it. So your studies focused on the similarities between veterans transnationally, and you spent 2 years in former Yugoslavia collecting stories and your data. Can you tell us about your findings? Did they surprise you in any way?
Determined. There are some initial surprises and there are some initial conclusions. Right now, I'm on the third year of the 4-year PhD trajectory and research trajectory at this space. And indeed, the first 2 years of the PhD were spent basically following veterans, through finding and following veterans across Croatia and Southeast Europe in general, to the point where some of the veterans are like, Charlie, the anthropologist is coming back again. I was like, you have to give the warning. It's like, once you let us in the door, it's very hard to get us out, get us to leave. That's just the nature of anthropology. But they've been deeply appreciative of the efforts and the outreach and their participation, the way that I've structured and speak about their participation within the research, because it's deeply collaborative. It can't just be the American veteran voice or the foreign researcher voice dominating the conversation. It really, you have to sit back, you have to take the back seat and just hang out and listen to the voices, listen to the problems, listen to the perspectives, but then also just experience them yourself as they walk through life, and just having the opportunity to walk alongside them as they deal with many of the same problems that veterans in the Netherlands deal with, or veterans in Oklahoma deal with, or veterans in the American territories and the South Pacific, with getting healthcare, getting recognition, being able to access things easily. These problems lead me to conclude that there's many more similarities between veterans than there are differences. Now, there are some strong differences, and there are people out there that want to emphasize those differences while ignoring the huge amount of similarities that actually exist. And when I hear that, and when I hear somebody doing that, then I'm always kind of suspicious of their agenda. Okay, so why are you kind of emphasizing the differences? Even though they might be quite stark, they might be quite strong, but why are you only talking about the differences and you're not talking about this whole mass of similarities between veterans trying to get connections with their government officials, trying to get recognition for their injuries? When you start talking about female veterans, then it's, the similarities are also remarkably strong. Mm-hmm. You have female veterans that are fighting for recognition, for space, for resources in these communities and these societies that are deeply patriarchal. And so they're having to fight multiple battles, one with just the state, but also within their own societies. Is like, yes, no, I did fight. I am a veteran, but yet we only speak about the male veterans, or when it comes time to commemorate something, it's only the male veterans that are front and center. And in saying that, I'm sure that many of the female veterans in the United States could be probably nodding their head quite readily and hearing themselves in some of these reflections that have been shared with me, or that I've experienced alongside female veterans in Bosnia and Croatia. And Yeah, I feel like I kind of got off the track there, but the conclusions are that there's a striking number of similarities between us, despite ethnicity, despite religion, despite nationality. The veteran experience and the veteran life world that emerges after service. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about Vietnam or Croatia in the 1990s. There are these very, very strong communities and connections that are either imagined or very, very real, and they have influence on the veterans as they walk through life. And I've found that to be a very positive development in the research, a very positive finding, to speak in more academic terms, perhaps.
A positive finding. I'm glad that you kind of veered into the female veteran experience, because we had talked previously, and I found it really interesting, your story of the American female veteran versus maybe veterans in former Yugoslavia. And what was it that the veteran felt invisible? What was that campaign?
Yeah, so a lot of my work these days also is kind of looking at the narratives and the discourse in different countries, one of which is the United States. And in the United States, there's a social media campaign or just a campaign in general that's been structured around the trope, I am not invisible. And it's organized and coordinated and is empowering for American female war veterans. And you see some of the posters in airports. My mother sent me a photo of some of the posters at the local Veterans Affairs Hospital in Albuquerque. And so there are these narratives that are coming around and being shaped by this trope of invisibility. And that's something that the female veterans themselves are building and have experienced and are wanting to share. And it's something that has to be taken into consideration when understanding the female veteran experience in the United States. But what's also interesting about that is when you take this term invisibility and speak to, and what we were talking about earlier was Croatian female veterans. The Croatian female veterans, almost every single one of them I spoke with actually explicitly rejected this notion of invisibility. They were like, well, no, Charlie, we don't agree with that. Us personally, as female veterans, it's not a word we would use to describe our positioning or our presence within either veteran societies or Croatian society as a whole. We're always in second place. Is what I was repeatedly told. So it wasn't so much invisibility, but in that patriarchal system, the women were always one step behind when it came to commemoration, when it came to recognition of their associations and their organizations, or even just recognition of their service in combat was problematized by being female. And so the narrative that they've developed and that they've embraced is this second place narrative of always being in second place instead of being alongside of the male veterans in Croatia. And so that indeed is, when you listen carefully and you live in these different areas, and I've been hosted multiple times by a female Croatian veteran that lives in Eastern Croatia. Her and her husband always host me, and I stay at their house when I'm there. And she's the president of a Female Veterans Association. And in spending time in the evenings and just hanging out, as well as professional structured interviews, you hear these different aspects of the discourse and the narratives, and you start to learn, okay, well, yeah, just because it's being said by female veterans in America, that doesn't mean that that's a global female veteran experience. And so we have to really be careful about that and allow all those other voices to come into the conversation.
Well, and even in the United States, everybody's got a different perspective, but I'm really excited because we're actually going to be having a female EOD tech on the podcast coming up, and I'm going to be sure to ask her, how does she feel about that campaign? Does she feel invisible? It's just such important conversations to be having. And it's just...
And don't get me wrong, just because since we are being recorded and there'll be different audiences and everything, it's not that I'm criticizing any one of these narratives. I'm not saying that there should be a fault bound or I'm not saying that you're implying that either. But, just to be clear, it's not... The point of this isn't to necessarily or immediately be critical, but it's just to learn, listening, and to hearing these different things. And this kind of ties back into that holistic approach to the veteran in academia. So whether it's the transition, whether it's treatment for traumatic brain injuries, whether it's dealing with the lingering effects of moral injury, all of these things are part of the veteran experience and need to be seen as such instead of just being, little aspects being dissected and that being held up as representative of the veteran experience.
Wow. How interesting. So I wanted to ask, is in your years of, meeting these people and learning them and listening to their stories and getting their perspectives, is there like any story that kind of sticks out like in that whole 2 years that you'd like to share?
I was thinking about this question, and it's a tough one to answer. I'm going to get myself into some trouble because if I talk about one experience from one country, then the veterans in Bosnia are going to be like, "What, you didn't enjoy?
What about us?"
And so it's an answer fraught with difficulties on a number of levels. But one of the kind of the last really big experiences that I had in Croatia as I was winding down the first 2 years of the research and about to transition from Southeast Europe back to my home institution, my home university here in Belgium. And it was with I actually have a patch of those right here, the Motorcycle Club Veterans Croatia.
Oh, wow.
And I had been following them on social media for some time because this type of kind of social collective, the motorcycle club, but one that is veteran-centric. The president is veteran, his wife and co-founder, she is a veteran. Most of the core members are all veterans, but they also open up the club to their family members and to just supporters of veterans. And, the word patriot would definitely be applied to a number of these individuals that want to join with this particular motorcycle club. And I saw on social media that they were they were preparing for this massive ride across Croatia. And they would start in the east and ride as a rally across Croatia all the way down to the southern tip where Dubrovnik is located. Now, it's not, and then saying that, it should sound like, okay, well, why were they able to do that before? Or why is that, of particular note? This was actually the first ride that many of these veterans were able to do that connected all of Croatia. Because before a certain bridge was built, you had to leave Croatian territory, go through Bosnia, and then re-enter Croatian territory to get to Dubrovnik.
Wow.
But the Croatians, with the help of the EU, and I think there were some Chinese companies involved with the construction, they built this really critical bridge. And it turned into this great patriotic moment. And anthropologists, we would be talking about the completion of the nation-building projects with this particular bridge. So it was a really momentous occasion for so many of these veterans and bikers who fought for the formation of Croatia to actually, for the first time, be able to travel the length and breadth of Croatia without actually leaving Croatian territory. So as you can imagine, there was a lot going on there for an anthropologist, for a veteran, for research. And so I immediately started working my network of connections, and I knew a couple of veteran bikers in Eastern Croatia that I had met and interviewed before. And so I have them on the phone, I'm sending emails, and it wasn't even 48 hours. I had a seat in the logistics van that was going to be supporting the ride and a spot on the back of a motorcycle of a Croatian veteran for parts of the ride. So it was a really, really fantastic experience. And we camped in different motorcycle clubs along the way. And every day I was speaking with new veterans. They were coming up and asking me about my research. Word got around quite quickly that I was an American veteran. And so we were swapping stories from combat, me in Iraq, them along some of the front lines in Croatia in the 90s. A couple of Afghanistan veterans as well, since Croatia had joined with NATO and was supporting some of the missions in Afghanistan. So there was a lot going on, and I'm sitting there curiously scribbling notes.
Wow.
There was a little bit of drinking, just a little bit of drinking involved in the evenings, of course, in the evenings. And so some of the field notes that I have aren't exactly hyper clear. You know, they need some context and everything. Maybe the handwriting in the darkness.
Oh my gosh, how
after
funny.
you know a bottle of Jack Daniels, your handwriting is always spot on. When you're trying to make a final note before the thought disappears out of your mind.
Was there poetry? Did you write any poetry?
Yeah. No, poetry plays a big part of it, and there was a couple lines that were. Yeah,
I love poetry.
It was a really special kind of end or temporary conclusion to the field work, and really informative. Gifts were exchanged, and gift giving and gifts have been the focal point of anthropological research since the beginning of anthropology. You know, this idea of gifts and gift exchanges and everything. And so we exchange gifts, and I'm mentioned now in their official club history. They publish every 4 years a club history, and my research and my picture and everything is in the latest edition that covered that big rally and everything. So that's definitely one of the highlights and everything. But I can point to a dozen others in Kosovo, in Bosnia, Slovenia, whitewater rafting in Slovenia with veterans, and just an incredible 2 years with living and working with the veterans.
Wow. So that is just amazing and so fun. So you used a phrase before that I had never heard, which was strategic peace building. What is it, and how do you feel that veterans can contribute towards those efforts?
So strategic peace building, it's why we tack on that term strategic versus just saying peace building, which is perfectly fine, but adding strategic onto it triggers a certain intent. So strategic peace building takes a much broader perspective, especially along timelines, but also in the breadth of programs or initiatives or outcomes that might be analyzed. And through this analysis and through this longer term perspective on either past peace building or current peace building efforts, then you start to look at making new models or figuring out new approaches to building peace between communities, between nations, looking at trying to interrupt cycles of warfare or interrupt cycles of violence. So while peace building might be discussed and operationalized at a very kind of fundamental community level, with one organization dealing with just immediate community members, strategic peace building can be seen to be operating on a different scale, in a sense. And I guess kind of a clever way of tying that in with anthropology, whereas, anthropology is, to quote Tim Ingold from the United States, very well-known anthropologist, anthropology is about transformation. Ethnography is about documentation. And that's really what I was doing this first 2 years, was documenting what was going on and listening and experiencing what was going on in veteran lives in Belgium, the United States, Croatia, Kosovo, what have you. And that documentation then goes into the efforts anthropology makes at transformation. And what that means to me in my particular research is looking at transforming and contributing to the notions of strategic peace building. How can veterans participate and influence strategic peace building? What are their thoughts about peace building? Ultimately, why are they being excluded from these conversations? Why do you not more frequently find veterans being invited into these conversations? It's almost always, initiated or approved by sometimes the very same politicians that led a community or a nation into war are the same politicians that are then charged with constructing the peace. And, that has its own set of positives and negatives. But what really kind of triggered my curiosity was, why are veterans being brought into these conversations? The veterans are the ones that have the combat experience, that quite literally, in a very bodily way, supported or defended or created the nation. But yet, once the combat is over, once attempts at peace building are initiated, once the uniforms are gone, once the weapons are set aside, it's like the veterans just kind of disappear in the literature and in reality. And that was quite a curious thing for me. And so I'm still kind of working through that and moving through that. But that's really kind of one of the grander agendas or initiatives within my research, is kind of seeing like, okay, now we have a better understanding of the veteran in society. We understand some of the relationship problems that they have with other veterans or amongst themselves or with non-veterans. What lessons can we then learn from this about how we can bring the veterans into these more mainstream conversations about life in the nation, about international relations with former enemies, about peace building, about post-conflict resolution. Is there a space for the veterans? What might that space look like? What would we have to do to be able to empower and encourage the veterans to take part? Because many of them are frustrated. They've been ignored for so long, or they've been invisible for so long, or forgotten. That idea of the forgotten veteran. That's something that rings very true in the United States ever since Vietnam, if not, obviously before.
Yeah.
And so, it's not so much placing the burden on the veteran for not participating, but looking at these peace building systems and strategies and saying like, okay, why aren't you doing something that is inclusive for the veterans? Why aren't you creating an inclusive space for the veterans? Why aren't you remembering the veterans who actually fought for the position that you're actually working from right now? So that's kind of like the grander idea, I suppose, and not everybody's on board with it. Hatreds run deep, but memories run deep of lost family members lost in combat against an enemy, against an aggressor, and understandably, of course. But I've encountered enough really critical experiences and relations that to give me hope for this research and optimism for this research. Croatian veterans who had to overcome their own kind of psychological trauma, if not actual physical traumatic brain injury, their anger that they carried with them for many years, as it was described to me by one Croatian veteran, he had to learn how to let that go. And he had to learn, he said, for his own sake, he had to learn how to stop hating Serbians, not just Serbian soldiers, but Serbians, period. Wow. And now he connects with Serbian veterans and he stays in their homes. And I encountered several of these, not even several, I've encountered multiple kind of stories that are in that same line. And some of them are... I was friends with a Serb growing up because that's what Yugoslavia was, Charlie. Then we went to war. We were on opposite sides of the front line. And now I'm living in Sarajevo. He lives in a different part of Bosnia. When he comes to town after the war, we get together, we have dinner. I'm invited up for his religious holidays and everything. So it's we had to learn to reestablish those, cross-ethnic relations or those cross-national relations. And I encountered a lot of that. And it was really kind of a uplifting, positive experience for the research. But there's also a lot of naysayers out there as well.
I'm sure. But while I'm listening to you, I keep thinking of like that bridge, the story with the motorcycles, and like just thinking like really like bridging the gap between all of these veterans and empowering them to have their voices be heard. I think that your work is so important, and just appreciate everything that you're doing to support the veteran community, not just our own in the United States, but just around the world. It's pretty incredible, Charlie.
That's the dream. Is it's kind of like learning these veterans' stories and their experiences. How might that reshape or help us as American veterans? It's definitely looking to kind of create that two-way dialogue or that reciprocal dialogue where the experiences we've learned as American veterans, especially when it comes to suicide, because that's tragically, that's not, something that's, that we can even say is unique to American service members. Croatia is just now coming to terms and trying to even just get metrics on veterans to suicide in Croatia. And so how can the Croatian veterans learn or understand or get ahead of the game, in a sense, by looking at the American veteran experience as we try to support our comrades, our brothers and sisters who are dealing with suicidal thoughts, who don't have the support or are having difficulty trying to conceptualize how to access that support and everything. And so there are reciprocal lessons here that everybody can be learning from. And also in a more positive light, the way that the veteran entrepreneurs, the podcast, Behind the Warrior, you speak with a number of veteran EOD veteran entrepreneurs.
True.
And that's a source of inspiration and hope for veterans in other parts of the world. It's like, okay, yeah, this guy's a veteran like me, mud, blood, lived to tell the tale, but now he's got a great coffee business or in real estate or something else like that. So, connecting these stories is really kind of, center.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad I understand more about anthropology now. And I love the word transforming. Who was it that you said you quoted?
Tim Ingold.
Okay. I'll have to look into that.
He can be. He's a bit controversial for some anthropologists, but he's very well respected and very well published. Which for any of the academics listening right now, that's a big deal. It's a big mark of rank, as we would say in the military. But very well published, very well respected, and he has some very, very direct and sometimes kind of controversial opinions about anthropology, the role of ethnography, and how anthropology fits into the broader scheme of things. But he's a great author. He's a great anthropologist. I always enjoy his work.
Interesting. Well, so Charlie, thank you so much for spending some time with us and telling us all about this work that you're doing. And I just wanted to ask, what does the future hold in store for you? What's the next couple years going to look like?
Considering that I didn't know what the last 2 years were going to look like up until I was almost on the train to Zagreb, there's a lot of speculation involved with that. If everything goes to plan at the end of 2024, I'll have my PhD in hand. I'll have defended my PhD, and we'll be looking for a kind of following the traditional progression of academia, and looking for a postdoctoral program to join up with to continue this research, continue publishing, continue spending time in Southeast Europe, and looking at these different narratives and experiences in the United States and elsewhere. So that's the hope. That's the hope. Now, what country that's going to be in, if I stay here in Leuven or in Belgium, I have no idea. But that's the hope.
Now, is there going to be a book forthcoming that we can look forward to?
Yeah. So there's a manuscript that's in the process of being written right now. And that manuscript is kind of what I'll be defending, will form the basis of my defense and my research at the end of 2024. And then the hope is, the intent, not just the hope, but the intent is to revise that manuscript for publication for a broader audience. And hopefully that will be the first book of several dealing with veterans, anthropology, strategic peace building, and add to a small but growing body of work that I've published in Serbia and in the United States.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I can't wait to read it. So, Charlie, I'm going to end.
Me too.
So we're going to end the interview with a couple of your favorite things. So the first one is you speak 5 languages, which is amazing. What is your favorite language to speak?
Well, it depends on your definition of speak.
Okay.
If I'm being tested, that 5 quickly diminishes. But I'm conversational, and I'm reading competent in 5 languages. But I don't know. I guess I don't know. I should have thought about that earlier. But Albanian for the Albanian just for the difficulty that's involved with it. It's such a dramatically different language from English on a number of levels, and it's quite challenging. And not many people in the world, relatively speaking, speak Albanian, so it's also challenging just to keep your talent about you, that keeping the tongue active and alive.
Oh wow, that's neat. Okay, what is your favorite thing about living in Belgium?
There is a fantastic beer culture here that I had very, very little recognition of when I first arrived here. I knew that there was the standard kind of connection between Belgians and beer, as in with Germany and beer. Mm-hmm. But the Belgians take it to a whole nother level, and there's a whole kind of culture that involves like different glasses and different techniques and flavors and brewing styles, and it's this really wonderful dimension of Belgian society that it's not like I had to twist my arm to learn to love it, but I've really come to love that aspect of life in Belgium.
Interesting. Well, what is your favorite beer?
I have a couple of go-tos, like Omer. It's a blonde beer. It's a blonde Belgian beer. That's quite nice. But your favorite beer changes every time you go into the bar, and there's a new beer there that you haven't heard of.
So true.
There's for kind of one of the smaller beers that you can find in some places. I won't bother you with the name of it, but it's a whiskey infused beer that is just really fantastic, both in taste, color, texture, everything. But 3 or 4 of those, because I think they're around 10%. Alcohol content for 0.33 is about 10%. So you get a couple of those into you, you're doing pretty good.
Well, yeah, I've noticed all these microbreweries popping up, and it's like, I remember when 5 was a lot, and now it's like 7, 8, 9, 10, like, woo! So next question, what is your favorite food in former Yugoslavia?
That's easy. That's sarma. That's sarma. Sarma, yeah. It's this wonderful dish that you can find almost anywhere in Southeast Europe. And of course, each country has a little bit, some have a little bit of a variation on it for size or kind of perhaps, mostly just with size. But of course, each country or even just each town says, no, the best sarma is to be found here.
Oh, sure.
Not over there. The sarma here, but sarma, it's a pickle. It's a dish where you have this minced meat with various seasonings and spices rolled in and added into the mince, and then it's all wrapped with pickled cabbage, big pickled cabbage leaves.
Oh wow!
And traditionally, it's mostly it creates this as it's cooking, as it's kind of being, I don't know if stewed is the right word for it, but as it's being cooked, there's this wonderful smell. And traditionally, it's served in the fall and the wintertime. It's a very hearty meal, so it was kind of originally designed for after a winter day's hard work, taking care of things, keeping the calorie content up and everything. But also, since the pickled cabbage is the key ingredient to sarma, there's a seasonal thing that has to happen, because there has to be a season of that cabbage being pickled at home before it could actually be utilized and everything.
Wow.
But so that's my favorite dish. And I was writing an article just a little bit ago for publication in Croatia, and I mentioned that the best sarma can be found in Karlovac, and it's cooked by this little grandmother that I know in her apartment, and it's about the closest thing to fantastic when it comes to food for me.
Wow, it sounds delicious. So the last question I have, who is your favorite philosopher?
Philosopher, yeah. So as I mentioned, I'm happy that you asked for favorite philosopher, not favorite anthropologist, because I don't want to be burning any bridges or unintentionally recontextualizing my research in a way that I don't realize. But no, so philosopher, Franz Fanon. He wore so many hats. He had so many kind of identities while he was alive. He is a veteran himself. He fought against the French colonial forces in Algeria. He was extensively sometimes posthumously published. One of his books was really influential and informative for me was it's titled The Wretched of the Earth. And he really kind of takes up these different ideas and looks at what the meaning of resistance is, and how to fight back about colonial powers, or just how to kind of engage power itself, and what does it mean, and the moral or kind of philosophical justifications behind engaging violence as a means of resistance against, in his day, in kind of the most immediate sense, against colonial powers. But his books range across many, many topics, issues of identity, of what life after colonization would look like, the resistance against colonization. Many of his works were influenced by the fact that he was a combat veteran himself. He served in combat, and he carried that with him as he was writing these, what have come to be almost quite foundational texts, both in Europe and the United States, in certain movements. And you speak to the right people, and they'll know The Wretched of the Earth right off the bat, as well as a number of his other publications. They've been very influential in the United States. But he's definitely a man I would have liked to have met and spent some time with, either academic to academic, veteran to veteran, decolonizer to decolonizer. I don't know, but he definitely ranks up there.
Awesome. Well, Charlie, thank you again so much. This has been a very fun interview, learning about anthropology and everything that you're doing. And we just wish you the best of luck. And we'll have to circle back up in a couple years and find you and get your manuscript.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time and the interest, and of course the opportunity. It's highlighting some of this work, as well as just another way of amplifying the veteran voice, not just Charlie the veteran, but veterans collectively that we work with and everything. So I really appreciate the opportunity for that as well. So thank you.
You're so welcome. You take care, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our Behind the Warrior podcast, brought to you by the EOD Warrior Foundation. The EOD Warrior Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization serving the EOD community by providing financial assistance, scholarships, and providing hope and wellness resources for the active duty, reserve, National Guard, retired, and veteran EOD communities and their families. We also honor our fallen and wounded EOD technicians by maintaining the EOD Memorial and Remembrance Garden. We do all this through the generosity of individual and corporate donors and sponsors. If you would like to assist the foundation or support our Behind the Warrior podcast, click the link on our webpage at eodwarriorfoundation.org or contact us at info@eodwarriorfoundation.org. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to tell a friend. The various opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints expressed by guests, contributors, and participants of the Behind the Warrior podcast are their own and are intended for informational purposes only. They do not necessarily reflect the opinions, beliefs, viewpoints, or policies of the EOD Warrior Foundation or its employees and volunteers.